I'm Laurah Norton, and this is One Strange Thing, the show where we search the nation's news archives for stories that can't quite be explained. Our most beloved strangers. If you've been with us for a while, well, then you know this fact. With the exception of lake and sea monsters, bipedal, ape-like creatures are by far the most common cryptids that we encounter. Bigfoots and similar creatures are incredibly common across the world. And we're proud to say, with all those creatures out there, the United States is the undisputed champion in primate cryptid sightings. Call them Sasquatches, Bigfoots, apes, hairy men, it's all one and the same. Every corner of the United States has its own primate cryptid, though, of course, the Pacific Northwest is our biggest hotspot. All that lovely land, that temperate weather, those giant trees. Honestly, if we were Bigfoots, we'd settle right there too. In fact, with that habitat as an option, it seems a little odd that a large, hairy creature might make its home anywhere else. But especially not in the swamplands of the southeast. That humidity alone would be terrible for their fur, and yet they are sighted in Florida and its surrounds with alarming frequency. Do primates sweat? Yes. Yes, they do. We have just Googled it. Maybe that's why the skunk ape is reported to stink so prodigiously. And if there's one place we imagine that's even sweatier than Florida, it's Louisiana. So maybe it's not surprising that the Bayou State is the setting of our latest tale, which involves long-standing reports of a very stinky monster. So, down in St. Tammany Parish in East Louisiana, there's a marshland known as Honey Island Swamp. According to a local tourist website, it's named that because the area is abundant with honeybees. That and alligators and everything else you can imagine, but the bees won in terms of naming. Anyway, Honey Island is a bit of a jewel as far as swamps go. Hundreds of its acres are government-protected land, so it's largely untouched. Tours are allowed, and locals move through the swampland, but major industry is a big no-no. So, maybe it's not so odd to imagine that there's room for one little cryptid. Well, okay, not so little. According to the official Gulf Coast Heritage Site, quote, the monster is described as being 7 feet tall, with long gray hair and large yellow eyes. The creature also has huge webbed feet and smells like putrefied trash. Very vivid, we must say. The Gulf Coast Heritage Site also offers up a little lore that may set the stage for this monster's origin. They describe a vague traveling circus train wreck sometime around World War I that filled the swampland with chimpanzees. Or, if you take the Sun's word for it, this is the Mississippi paper The Sun, not the British tabloid. It was actually in the early 1960s that the train crashed, if there was even a train at all. Anyway, the point was that somehow, either one of these chimps or a descendant of the chimps, changed, grew, mutated, became more. Yes, strangers, this is our second crashed circus train scenario in a month. It's like these episodes are writing themselves. But in this story's case, it's only a side story in the main course. These sightings officially began with a man named Harlan Ford, and they have continued to this day. Now, as with most creature tales of the United States, local lore does date back, farther than we can trace in any newspaper, but the first modern, officially recorded report of what would come to be known as the Honey Island Swamp Monster came from 2 men who were familiar with the vast marshland, Harlan Ford and Billy D. Mills. According to Country Roads magazine, the friends were air traffic controlmen who spent their free time out in the wilderness, and they were apt to scout out potential camping spots from their own little plane. They'd done just that in 1963 and found the perfect spot in what the magazine described as, quote, a remote area of the swamp. Harlan and Billy were at that camp when they claimed to see a strange beast, one that Harlan would spend the rest of his life tracking. The remote campsite became a permanent outpost for him, and eventually his son. Even his granddaughter Dana has gotten in on the swamp monster lore. And what was it that Harlan and his friend saw? Per the Times-Picayune, the two men spotted what appeared to be, quote, a huge creature on all fours at the edge of the thick woods. But it did not stay that way. Harlan and Billy reported that it quickly rose up on two legs. According to Country Roads magazine, Harlan then described the following, quote, an unkempt behemoth, over 7 feet tall, with scraggly black hair covering its body from head to toe, and piercing amber eyes looking out from a surprisingly human-like face. Harlan recalled, I thought it might be a bear, and then it turned around. The Times-Picayune reported that the creature maintained eye contact for a few fleeting moments and then fled deep into the swamp. At the time, the men told reporters that they'd seen strange tracks in the mud, but the rain washed them away before they could collect proof. Harlan said that he would go back into that swamp and try again, and he did. In fact, this sighting began Harlan Ford's lifelong obsession with what would become known as the Honey Island Swamp Monster. We're honestly not sure what became of Billy. Maybe he was along for the ride, but it was Harlan whose name became synonymous with that early sighting. Perhaps it's because it was he who made their temporary camp permanent, or it's because it was his son and now his granddaughter who've continued speaking to the press. It's definitely in part because Harlan was the one who made the first major TV appearance concerning the creature. Per Country Roads, that was on Leonard Nimoy's popular series In Search Of, in an episode that aired in 1978. Whatever the primary reason, it's fair to say that the association matched Harlan's level of obsession. According to the Times-Picayune, it was in 1974 that Harlan claimed he'd finally tracked down footprints from the beast and made plaster casts of those prints. Harlan said he discovered the tracks at the site of a fresh kill, specifically of a wild boar. He was very interested in having these prints examined by experts. Harlan's son, Perry Ford, would later tell the Sun newspaper that the prints were 4-toed specimens. Perry claimed that the plaster cast had been examined by experts from the Smithsonian, and he reported that the experts eventually decided that the prints could not have been made by the average primate. So, as Perry figured, this was definite proof that the prints could not have been made by any escaped chimp from a train crash. Apparently, he'd also heard that story. Perry didn't specify why, but when we did a little digging, aka when we searched how many toes do chimps have, we discovered that they, like all large primates, have 5. Harlan's granddaughter, Dana, also noted that the prints were unique in another way. Per the Times-Picayune, she said that the toes were webbed. She also said that other professionals had viewed the casts, including professors from LSU and local wildlife officials, and that no one could quite decide what sort of beast had made them. In fact, Dana has been quite a useful source regarding her grandfather's ongoing quest to uncover the mystery of the Honey Island Swamp Monster. She told the Times-Picayune that one of her most formative memories was of Harlan attempting to bait a trap deep in the swamp for the creature. Unfortunately, he was using one of the family's goats. Dana recalled, I was about 13 or so. We lived nearby where my granddad lived, and me and my brother had come to consider granddad's goat as our pet. But don't worry, strangers. The monster did not take the bait, and Dana got her goat back unscathed. We think that it's an interesting story, though, in context, because it shows effort on Harlan's part. And that's important, considering so many people in the area thought Harlan was pulling one over on them. In fact, it was widely suspected that he and Billy had invented the creature and had even produced fake footprints. According to Country Roads magazine, the major theory was that they'd, quote, had a shoe with a swamp monster track glued on the bottom and had walked around the swamp making those footprints. Why? Maybe for attention, though others said it was, quote, to secure their hunting territory in the swamp. We've heard that kind of story, of course. People create hoaxes for all sorts of reasons. And when Harlan went on TV in 1978, it only deepened local suspicion. It seemed like he was seeking fame. After all, what's easier to believe? Stories of a 7-foot-tall, stinking, fantastic beast, or a tall tale from a canny hunter? The latter, of course. Except for one strange thing. Harlan Ford died in 1980, and when his family went through his belongings, it was discovered that he had more evidence that he had never shared with the public. If he'd been out for fame and fortune, or even simply to secure that hunting ground, then why hadn't he released everything that he had? Per the New Orleans Advocate, his family found an 8mm recording of the creature, along with a written account of all of his sightings and evidence. He also had more plaster casts, but the footage is what has really struck people, and you can imagine why. It's the kind of thing that most cryptid hunters would release as soon as they had it. So, why didn't Harlan? Dana, Harlan's granddaughter, has since shared this film on YouTube, and we watched it, and we can definitively say it is not definitive. There's a vague, large, man-like shape that's probably hairy, walking through the dense brush. It's very far away from the camera. Could it be a monster? Yes. Could it be a man in a furry suit? Also yes. What's more interesting to us, though, is that Harlan kept this film to himself. He'd had it for some time, how long exactly no one knows, but he had it before his death. He certainly could have released it, and it would not have undergone the scrutiny of today's film analysis. So why didn't he, if he was only seeking recognition? It's a quandary, and Harlan is hardly the only person to have reported sightings. Back in 1973, the year before Harlan managed to get his first plaster cast footprint, a man named Greg Faulkner made the State Times-Advocate newspaper. Greg, who was described as, quote, a part-time guide in the Honey Island swamp, was lauded for apparently, quote, discovering a new species of monster in the twisting bayou. We imagine this may have irritated Harlan Ford, who was not mentioned in the article at all. Greg claimed that he'd been tooling around the swamp when he struck something with his boat. He told the Times-Advocate, I rolled over it. The motor kicked up, and I realized I hit something. I stopped and looked, but I kept going up the bayou a ways. He said he looked back and saw a creature emerging from the water. It was a bipedal animal, but he couldn't tell if it was covered in hair or just skin. It was too darkly colored. He said it scurried out of the water and into the depths of the brush, much too fast for him to turn around and follow. But, Greg explained, it did leave something behind. Its tracks. Large, webbed, 5-toed ones. Greg described a creature about 2 feet shorter than Harlan's towering beast, but the tracks were consistent, and that would seem to be the calling card for the creature, no matter who sighted it. And then, in 1981, the Morning Advocate reported that a father and son duo, Harmon and Mark Levrin, had trekked to the swamp to shoot poisonous snakes on a Sunday afternoon, which, we guess, might be a hobby, and had their own run-in. They told reporters that they'd been happily shooting at snakes when a horrible stench drifted into the clearing where they stood. Harmon Levrin recalled, suddenly there was a horrible smell in the air. I told Mark that somebody had probably dragged a dead cow into the swamp. They tried moving to a new spot, but the smell followed them. When something moved into their line of sight, they realized that they were being tracked by a creature, not an odor. Harmon said that they saw a huge, shaggy-looking thing, quote, running deeper into the swamp. And then another local described a similar sighting just a few weeks later, but said that the beast also had a tail like an alligator and left five-toed, webbed prints. Something like a cross between an alligator and a primate, he said. Don't ask us how that's managed. In the world of cryptids, anything is possible. And the sightings have continued with regularity to this day. And we'd be remiss if we failed to mention how good for tourism the legend of the Honey Island swamp monster is. The cryptid TV shows have all made their rounds. The boat captains are sure to mention the lore as visitors snap photos of that beautiful marsh, and podcasts recount the tale to their happy listeners. It's not so different from any other monster tale, and we admit, with the ostensible origin of chimpanzees crashing into a swamp, it's a bit of a leap to giant mutation, extra toes, and possible alligator tails. But we can't help but find Harlan Ford's private dedication to the monster interesting. It is one thing to go on TV and proclaim your belief for fame and fortune, but it's another thing entirely to take a goat into the swamp and camp out alone, waiting for a creature to show its face or its feet, to hold on to 8mm footage and never tell a soul, not even your family of true believers. What we do when we're alone, when no one's watching, perhaps that is a better measure of what we honestly believe than any lip service we pay to reporters or TV cameras. So we can't help but wonder what Harlan actually saw deep in those swamps that sparked such an obsession. Even if he invented his own footprints, could it have been to make others believe in what he was sure he'd seen? What kind of experience could drive a man to those lengths? One of the strongest forces behind belief is the desperate hope that, with the right proof, others will believe too. Because then you're not alone. Not in the swamps with the stinky monster, and not with your own thoughts either. We hope you'll join us next time for another premium exclusive episode of One Strange Thing. Oh, and if you wouldn't mind, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on your favorite app. It helps us find more listeners.